Hey all, it's David Ducker coming back at you, and today I'm going to be talking about the story of your setting, the story of your world. This is a topic that comes up quite a bit on the Role Players Anonymous forum on Facebook, which you should all check out and join because it's awesome. But the way I design my campaigns is each campaign has a story to tell. And I get a lot of confusion about this. People say, oh, you're railroading. You've written a linear story and you're going to railroad the players through it. And while there's nothing wrong with doing that, but that's not what I do. And, I have some trouble explaining to them exactly what I'm talking about. And once I do explain myself, usually they'll still argue with me and they'll say, "Oh, well, that's a bad way of doing it anyway." So I thought I'd make a video addressing it. So the story of your world is going to be the story of the campaign, the big picture, the overarching storyline, and it can be fairly vague, or it can be very specific. But there needs to be one. There should be one, so that you can have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Especially the end. Without an end, I will just get angry at the story. If the story lasts too long with no ending, it feels forced. It feels artificial. We've all seen movies that had sequels that were unnecessary, and if you took the sequel and the regular movie and you showed them back to back, it would suck as a whole because the sequel is so bad. It would just suck. A good sequel, you should be able to hit it back to back and it flows. It feels like one story. It's like the difference between having part one and part two versus just a sequel, almost. And that's what I want on my campaign. I want the campaign to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's over, the end. And then we move on to the next one. And the way that you need to do that, you need to plan ahead for that to happen. You need to plan your story. And sometimes you can use while you're writing your world as well. It depends on how you do that process. They're different, but they can be linked together as well. So, I'm going to use some examples to explain myself in case anyone is confused. So, you have you have Star Wars, right? So you've got let's say you've got the setting already made. You're George Lucas. Imagine you're George Lucas, and you have the setting made. And you might even have the characters made. The party is assembled in your mind. But you need a story to make a movie. So let's pretend that George Lucas wrote all 6 movies in advance. Let's pretend he did. Maybe he did. He probably didn't, but maybe he did. So when do you choose to set the story? Do you choose to set it during a time when the Republic is healthy and happy? You could very well do that. Knights of the Old Republic. Or do you choose a time when the Empire is firmly in control and there's no rebellion? You could do that. Absolutely. But it's probably more interesting to choose one of these transition points. To choose when the Empire rose and the Republic fell. That's a story. The story of our prequel in this case is going to be the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. That's the story. Once that story is told, you say the end. And then if you want to do the sequel trilogy, that's cool. He, of course, chose the fall of the Empire and the rise of the New Republic. That's what he originally chose. He had one movie. He didn't know there would be any sequels. But he claims he wrote 6 movies. But and we're pretending that that's true. But he really didn't know that the other 5 movies would be made. He knew he could make one movie. And he had all these stories in this awesome universe. So he chose the most interesting time in that universe to set his characters. He chose the most interesting story because he knew, like any story, he needed a beginning, a middle, and an end. He needed to encapsulate it in a time frame. For him, it was like a 2-hour movie. For us as role players, it might be a year, it might be 5 years. Weekly sessions might be, it's probably easier to break it down for hours. You have like 100 hours, or you have 500 hours. But you need a beginning, a middle, and end. So when you're choosing your setting, when you're putting your game together, pick the most interesting time in that setting. Don't pick a time of peace, because that's not interesting. Pick a time of struggle, of conflict, of change. That's interesting. If you look at Game of Thrones, George Martin has set his story when the others are coming from the north, or the White Walkers as they're called on TV, because you can't see that it's others is capitalized every time they say it on TV. You can't see that, so they're called the White Walkers now. But he picked the time when the White Walkers are coming from the north. The setting is so good. I mean, you could do it, 10 years before, 10 years after, 100 years before, 100 years after. There's a bunch of time frames you could set your game in Westeros. But he chose the time when the others are coming. He said that's the most interesting time. So that's what I want for my novel series. My trilogy, as it was supposed to be originally. Now it's ballooned into 5 books so far. And he says 2 more on the way, eventually. As of the time of this video, perhaps he'll publish them back to back in the next 2 years. God, I hope so. But he chose this interesting time in the history of the world to set his story. If you look at the real world, World War II would be a great time to set a story. Everything before World War II, the 20 years before World War II, are kind of building up to it. And then everything since is almost like a reaction to what happened then. World War II, when the whole world was at war and the atomic bomb was invented. That's a pretty important time period. You wouldn't set your campaign in the real world. You probably wouldn't set it during the 50s without a really good reason, or during the 60s. I mean, you could. There are interesting things that happened, but if you want to get this really exciting story, probably World War II. Or if you want to go earlier, you could hit World War I. But looking back, it often feels like World War I is just a precursor to World War II. World War II is the main event. So, you want to pick that moment in history. So when you're making your campaign, you got to say to yourself, why have I picked this moment in history? What makes this time period special? What is the story of this time period? Because if there's no story for the world, what's the story of the campaign? You're going to have a lot of problems explaining that, and making that interesting. So work in advance, plan ahead. And once that story is over, you just say the end, and you end it. Now, a lot of people will accuse me of railroading here. Now that I've explained myself that you need to have a story, and the story needs to be exciting and big and bombastic, something worth your attention, because you only have a year, so you might as well make it as good as possible. And you're only going to run, like one fantasy game, or one superhero game, or one space opera game. And then you're going to switch genres, because there's a million genres. You're not going to run 2 fantasy games back to back. You're not going to run, 2 spy games back to back. You're going to switch it up. So you might as well get the biggest, coolest thing you could think of for that genre, and get that in there. So here's where people will accuse me of railroading, like I was saying. So here's my rebuttal, which is just that, you might have that story, but how the characters fit into the story, no idea. No idea at all. So in Star Wars, are they going to side with the Rebels or the Empire? Don't know. No idea. Are they going to convince the Sullust to side with the Rebels or the Empire? The planet Sullust? No idea. Who's going to win? No idea. World War II, are they going to be Allied forces or Nazis? I don't know. No idea. They can do whatever they want. I know that the story is about these two groups clashing. Whether it's Rebels and the Empire, or whether it's two countries, or two religions, or communism and capitalism, or whatever it is. The players can side with whoever they want, and they can influence 90% of people to join them or to leave them. So it's still a sandbox. It just has a story. So I'll give my specific examples. My last campaign was Rebels versus the Empire in a space opera, and it was fascists versus communists. The Rebels wanted a communist revolution in space. So the players, they started out as part of the Empire, which was actually a republic, but they started out as part of this big empire, and they had a spaceship, a really powerful spaceship. So they could do whatever they wanted with that ship. They could defect, or they could stick with the course, or they could convince people not to defect, or they could convince people to defect, and then they could do whatever they want. And I have no idea who's going to win. If it's going to be, if it will be a communist revolution, and it will be successful, or if the fascists will crush them. I have no idea. But I know when this main conflict is over, the curtain will drop, we will say the end, everyone will go around the table and deliver their epilogue, what happened to their character, and we'll move on. In this case, we moved on to a fantasy campaign. And the story of the fantasy, well, I won't reveal that, because my players might watch this video. I don't know why they watch the videos when they could just call me, but some of them do. So let's go to the one before that. It was also a fantasy campaign. Very different type of fantasy, but still fantasy. So this was also about like Rebels versus the Empire. I love this theme. It's awesome, a Civil War theme. I will try to avoid it in the future because I've overused it now, but I love it. So in this case, the players sided with the Empire, and the Empire won. It took 2 years to run the whole story out. They got a lot of people to defect, to join the Empire, and they crushed the Rebels, just crushed them. I had no idea which side they'd be on. I had no idea who'd win. I had no idea who'd switch sides. It was a sandbox, except for the fact that I knew it would be about a civil war. So that's what you need to decide before you start your campaign. What is the story? Is it going to be a clash of nations or ideologies or religions, or just two people who really hate each other? Because a campaign doesn't need to be long. It could be 8 sessions. What's the story? It's just these two pirate captains hate each other, and they're going to go to war, and and one of them will win and one of them will lose, and the two pirate fleets will be merged into one enormous pirate fleet. That could be an awesome story. It could only take 8 sessions. Maybe you could draw it out for a year, whatever you want. But when the story of those two pirate captains is over, and you can say, like, we've accomplished our mission. The reason we were brought together is over. That's when you need to end the story. And if I'm playing a game and I can look ahead and say, there will be no ending. We have no goal as a team. If I see that, I am really not enticed to stay, because the odds that we can play forever, very slim. So we need an ending, just in case we cannot play together forever. and then we need to go through and start a new campaign. I do a new one every year. I like a year is a good time span for me. You can do a lot with a story in 300 hours, give or take 100 hours. You can do a lot in that time. And we can probably keep 7 people on a weekly schedule for a year before somebody moves or dies or or has to work permanently on the night shift or whatever. So everyone can get some catharsis, try a setting, try a genre, try a system, then we move on. And if there were no main storyline, it'd be harder, way harder to do. Especially since a lot of the time, the main storyline is what keeps the party together. If you have these 7 individuals or 6 individuals brought together, usually it's with a goal in mind. And once that goal's over, they split up again. Look at the Lord of the Rings. Once Sauron is defeated, why would you stay with Middle Earth? You might love the characters, but they're splitting up. You might love the setting, but there's nothing exciting going on in that setting after Sauron is defeated. And it's the same thing with Star Wars or Mass Effect or The Matrix or any story you can think of. At a certain point it ended. And unless it ended on a really big cliffhanger for some reason, then you probably can't play any campaigns in there that are going to be as big and bombastic as I want. Or as you should want, depending on your style. I've met people and like, oh, I love the pedantic role-playing of, we're on a train ride and we just talk, and the train ride happens in real time. So it took 6 hours to take a train from New York to L.A. So we just role-played talking and reading for 6 hours, or if you like these really pedantic things, then we're just not going to get along for a whole other set of reasons. Because I like these big, bombastic campaigns. We got 300 hours, and that's all the time we get for this whole genre. So I want the biggest space opera story possible in 300 hours, because we might never do space opera again. I want to exhaust the genre. I want it to be so big and so good, that and so condensed that it's going to be this amazing experience in all of our lives. That's what I wanted of every game. We're going to do superheroes, and I never want to do another superhero game. I want 300 hours of the best of all superhero stuff ever. And that's it. And then I want to say the end and move on to another genre, like urban fantasy or conspiracy theory. I want to take all of the greatest conspiracy theory stories and cram them together and make it this really big story, because we only have a year and then we're never going to come back to conspiracy theory. In theory, we probably will eventually, but that's like 10 years down the line. I can easily think of 10 genres I want to run for a year. And then we'll move on to horror or urban fantasy or western or pulp. Let's count these out on the fingers. Just in sci-fi, you got military sci-fi, that takes a year. You got planetary romance, that can take a year. We got cyberpunk, that could take a year to play. But actual space opera, it could run for a year. So right there, I got 4 years of gaming. And why, if you're running a genre for 5 years, that's 20 years of gaming. So that's why I only do it for a year, because I love all these genres. I want to explore them. So this is my long ramble, but I hope I've explained what I mean by a campaign needs a story, and a setting needs a story, and a team needs a story. And it doesn't have to be a really tight railroad. It just has to be a story. What's a story we need to explore? Whether it's two people or 2 factions, it's usually a struggle of some kind. But it could even be like the colonization of a new planet or a new island. And You could do it man versus nature, and it's over when we've conquered nature. And for that, you might want to do a lot of flashbacks, and in game it takes 100 years, and you play as your character's descendants. But out of game, I want it to last 1 year and 300 hours or 200 hours or whatever. And then I want to say the end, and we move on. I don't want to play in real time, just like I don't want to role play riding on a bus in real time. Actually, I think Gentleman Gamer did a video about the worst RPG he's ever played, and he said that the GM made them role play waiting in a traffic jam in real time for 2 hours. And he made them role play using the washroom, using the lavatory, and it was very, very upsetting. And that's a game I don't want any part in, because I only have so much time in my life to game, and then I will die. So I don't have time to deal with this stuff. But that's going to be my ramble. That's what I mean. That's why I like it. That's how to execute it so that it is still a sandbox. And I think, and this is going to be partly opinion based. I think everyone should do something similar. So you can try a whole bunch of genres, a whole bunch of characters, a whole bunch of rule sets. That part is up for debate. If you want to play one character for 10 years, that's on you. If you want to play one setting and one rule set for 10 years, you can do that. That's not what I want to do. It's not even close to what I want to do. But I could see why people would do that to some degree. I could understand it. That part of the video is just my opinion. So if you want to do that, that's cool. I think the odds of you having a satisfying ending are low. Probably not existent. That you can run for, if I'm talking about 500 hours, so you're talking about like 10,000 hours of time that you want to invest, and you want to pace a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, the last 10,000 hours. You can attempt to do that. That's fine. It's not something I want to do. It's something that I think would be monumentally difficult to do well. But that is my opinion. So the factual things I wanted to state are, what the story of your setting and your characters should be, how to not keep it a railroad, how to still keep it a sandbox, and then everything else after that is not technique based. That's just my rationale for why you do that or why I do that. But I'd love to hear your opinions. If you think that I'm railroading, then leave that. Go ahead. If you think that you should not pick an exciting time for your campaign for some reason, or that you should linger after that excitement is gone, you can leave that. If you if you think that I don't even know what else you're going to comment, but I look forward to reading it. The less I know, the more surprised I'll be. The more surprised I'll be, the happier that I will be in the future, more happy than I am right now, and I'm pretty happy. But I do hope you have a good day. I hope it was somewhat educational. Everybody have a good day now. I'm repeating myself. I'm rambling.